Can you hear me? Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, distinguished guests, for joining me here today. Now, it's hard to believe, but we are today in day 712 since the surprise invasion of brutal scale, unleashed terror across Israel, shattering the nation's sense of security. In a relatively short time, Israel confronted 7 fronts. 5 of them are still active. Today, however, I would like to touch upon another front, the diplomatic front. Yes, I deliberately chose to use the word front and not arena, as it seems that Israel is using pressure, persuasion, instead of force, but the stakes are just as high. We will examine Israel's relations with 5 different countries 2 years ago and today, and looking forward. I would like to start with you, Veronika, as you are the only woman here besides me. Israel received an unwavering support from your government following October 7th. From your foreign minister to prime minister, president, defense minister, the list of visitors to Israel from the Czech Republic is very, very long. Your prime minister said on October 25, 2023, that he stands by Israel as long as necessary. How do you explain this unbreakable bond between our countries?
Thank you, Avital, and I'm very happy to be here. I must say this is something I am being asked a lot about, and I'm also thinking often about. I guess it starts a long time ago. We have to go back to our first president, Tomáš Masaryk, who was the first European leader who visited Yishuv in 1927 and became a strong Zionist supporter of the future Jewish state in British Mandatory Palestine. And basically when he was the first president of Czechoslovakia, then his ideas became the ideas of our nation. Then after the fall of communism, Václav Havel, another strong supporter of Israel, was kind of adopted Masaryk's ideas about many things and is also highly respected. So this is kind of underlying tone in the Czech foreign relations, strong bond with Israel and strong support to Israel. Also, I have to say, Prime Minister Netanyahu was supposed to travel to Prague on October 8th, and we were supposed to have government-to-government consultations on October 9th. So that brought kind of urgency and brought closer to us the feeling of October 7th and up to October 7th.
I would like to continue with you, Luca. Israel also heard loud and clear support from Italian officials. Your deputy prime minister said during his visit that, and I'm quoting, Italy stands firm with Israel in condemning terrorism. How close were the bilateral relations between Italy and Israel at that time?
Well, Avital, the relationship was on rising strongly. We actually, in October 23, we were supposed to hold a government-to-government meeting in Israel, and the two nations were going to sign about 15 agreements ranging from aerospace cooperation, defense, transport, and so on, cultural, archaeological. So, and we were even going to open a commercial office of the Italian embassy in Jerusalem. So I think things were going forward very, very well, and they were abruptly interrupted by the war. We hope that when this all finishes, we will be able to pick it up from there.
Thank you. Simon, I looked carefully at the long list of solidarity visits of UK officials to Israel after October 7th, and I was pleasantly surprised to see a very long list. From the Foreign Secretary to the Defense Secretary, from the Prime Minister Sunak at the time to the Attorney General. You were quite busy with all of these delegations. Please walk us through the bilateral relations at the aftermath of October 7th?
Thanks, Avital. Well, you're absolutely right. The instinctive response of the British government on and after the 7th of October was to express steadfast solidarity with Israel. Not only did we have a long list of very senior visitors, as you've just enumerated, I think I'm right in saying that James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, who visited here on the 11th of October 2023, was the first senior foreign visitor to go down to Otef Aza. We went to Ofakim, we went to Sderot, while some of the conflict was still, some of the clearing up operations were still taking place in the kibbutzim. And it was an extraordinary and horrifying experience to see what Hamas had done. As you may hear from my accent, I'm from Northern Ireland. I was born and raised there. The United Kingdom has long experience of terrorism of various sorts, both in the Irish context and also Islamist extremism. And of course, the largest single loss of British lives in an act of terrorism was in New York on 9/11, 2001. So we have a very long experience of terrorism, and therefore the reaction was one of instinctive solidarity. And that extended beyond merely diplomatic support for Israel's right and indeed duty to defend itself, and an understanding that the threat from Hamas would have to be dealt with very firmly. It extended to very practical military support. So, of course, as is known, the Royal Air Force flew both in April and in October last year, dealing with the threat to counter the threat from Iran, the firing of drones and missiles. The Royal Air Force also, alongside our American allies, took part in strikes on Houthi targets last year. And those are very practical examples of the kind of contribution that the UK has made. I don't want to anticipate the second part of this conversation, but I think it is worth mentioning, though, that it was fairly early on that concerns began to arise about the conduct of the war. But nonetheless, sympathy for Israel was maintained. And sometimes people draw distinctions or look for distinctions between the approach of the previous British government and the current British government. But it is worth noting, if you look at the list of visitors for the summer of 2024, immediately after the Keir Starmer government came into office, you will see another long list of very senior visitors. So I think that tells you something.
The practical part of being a coalition, practical participation of being the UK being part of the coalition and helping to defend Israel. I think that was a very important examples that you gave. I would like now to turn to Israel's geographically closest European country, which is Cyprus. The bilateral relations have strengthened significantly in the past 2 decades, from energy, security cooperation to trilateral summits with Greece focusing on regional security and more. What was the state of these relations on October 7th?
Indeed, Avital, the relationship between Cyprus and Israel has never been stronger. And on October 7th, just a month before, we had the 10th trilateral summit between Israel, Greece, and Cyprus. September 5th in Cyprus, I was there. And we planned another meeting with the Americans because the Americans see Israel, Greece, and Cyprus as, they are pillars in Eastern Mediterranean, which is a very important region, not only for the United States, but also for the EU, the UK, and so on. And unfortunately, for the reasons we all know, this changed within a night, within a day. Cyprus, as you know, has also excellent relations with the Gulf states, so we're even started talking about possible projects with Israel and Cyprus, with our Gulf partners, but then some other countries had other plans. But definitely this will not prevent us from coming to that point at some point.
Thank you for that. Jeremy, you will be representing and help us learn more about the German perspective, as you have been Israel's ambassador to Germany. And it's no secret that Israel and Germany share very special, unique relations. And how were, in your opinion, these relations were expressed immediately after October 7th?
Well, I think the immediate reaction of the Germans was very close to the shock that Israel society felt as a whole. Let's not forget that they have a profound commitment to Israel's survival and its security, as was enunciated by Angela Merkel in 2008, what is called the Stadträson, and I think that's very strong in their commitment. They've had an outstanding record with respect to the necessity of releasing all of the hostages as soon as possible. I remember the German ambassador to Israel, Stefan Seibert. We went, and he was one of the first ambassadors to visit the hostage forum. And I think that the successive visits of the German Foreign Ministry and the importance they've attached to this issue has been a very practical assistance to the families, and I think that's worth noting. Of course, they're obviously concerned as the war continued. I think it's fair to say that they want to see a clearer policy of Israel with respect to what the policy of the war is, what are the operational aims, and what is the day after, and how that also impacts the current events, how it impacts the welfare of the hostages. And as we're speaking today, I understand in Europe there are discussions regarding steps being taken against Israel. And I think this focuses on one major dilemma, is that a lot of times in the discussion people talk about steps against Israel and not, very specific and directed steps, because in the end the steps affect all of the people of Israel. And how can I say this?
Although you had some personal sanctions on a few ministers.
That is
so it's a combination.
That is one aspect, but I think steps, I would urge. Look, Europe is our most important trading partner, one of our biggest investors, and I would urge them to sort of look at the situation of preventing how they impact all Israelis. Because let's face it, a lot of Israelis want to see the end of the war, also want to see the hostages released, and see, at least coming out of this crisis, some political process with the Palestinians. But I'll stop there.
But it's good that you mentioned this, because this actually brings us to the second part of the discussion. And feel free to give longer answers in this part. If you open Israeli media these days, you will see a lot of talk and discussions about political isolation of Israel in the international arena. And with your help, I'd like to examine that, where we are now in each of your respected countries. So, Veronika, let me start with you. So if I'm looking at the last 2 years, there was an increase in anti-Semite rhetoric, primarily in social media. I have to say that there wasn't any case of really physical violence in the Czech Republic, but the social media, of course, was an integral part of this increase of anti-Semitism. But overall, with regard to the public sentiment towards Israel, Czech remains today still one of the most friendly countries in the EU to Israel. Do you agree?
Avital, I absolutely agree, although I believe that all the countries of my colleagues here also belong to this group of countries more friendly or friendly to Israel. I think it's because of the bond I talked about before. I think it's also because of kind of solidarity of smaller countries that were for most of the part of their existence surrounded by enemies, although we are now surrounded by friends. And it's also, I believe, because the Czech public did not forget how the war started. That, and it's all around the world, also in the Czech Republic. The social media is very quick. The current moment is the most important. And what happened a few weeks ago, not to say 2 years ago, is almost irrelevant.
So those pictures that, many countries around the world show of children in Gaza in a bad situation, destruction of buildings. I mean, I'm sure that in the Czech Republic people see it as well. So how do you still explain the very friendly kind of attitude? Is it something with the government? Is it something with the general sentiment in the political echelon, or something else?
I think it has also something to do with the communism we experienced, because, of course, everybody wants to see people in Gaza not to suffer and children not to die. But we also had, during the communist time, we lived through a lot of propaganda. So I think we are kind of more sensitive to being fed something we might see as a propaganda, although definitely not all the pictures of the destruction in Gaza are propaganda, and sometimes it's horrifying. But we kind of try to keep more distance from what we see and to analyze it from that distance.
Understood. Simon, I'm coming to you now. So from November 2023 until today, we in Israel here watched many anti-Israeli protests across the UK. I think the largest one was actually a month after October 7th. In London, there were 300,000 people there. A few organizations came together. That was really, if you remember the pictures on the bridge, it was quite astonishing. The turnout was amazing. On the academic front, there were as well protests, encampments, and some bans on cooperation with Israeli academic institutes. The recent example actually was just from a few days ago, where the Defense Ministry announced the banning of participation of Israeli students to enroll at the Royal College of Defense Studies in London. There were also, along the way, suspension of licenses of arms exports and additional issues. So in your opinion, how would you analyze what happened to the relations? Because you gave very good examples of the UK being a part of the active defense on Israel a few times and the fight with the Houthis. Would you say that there was a deterioration? And if so, did it have to do with the political changes in the UK, public pressure, including immigrants that you have in the UK? Where will you put your finger on?
Thanks, Avital. And it is genuinely good to be able to have the opportunity to set out some of this and what we think has happened. I said in my earlier comments that concerns about the conduct of the war began to grow relatively early on. I mean, there are a couple of things, at the very least, one needs in order to conduct a just war, a justified war. I mean, first of all, you need a clear purpose. What is the purpose you're aiming at? Now, there was
You're talking only about Gaza, I assume.
I'm sorry,
You're talking about Gaza?
I'm talking about Gaza,
because
yes.
There were other fronts as well.
There were indeed other fronts. I am focusing specifically on Gaza, because that has been the source of the primary source of the disagreements you're referring to. So what was the purpose? Well, the purpose to substantially reduce and degrade Hamas's military capability made sense. But that was achieved relatively early on. And I think it is clear now that and we see it reported widely that there is deep skepticism at senior levels in the Israeli security establishment, in the IDF and elsewhere, and in society at large, about...
I would say there are, two opinions in this. I think the security establishment is split.
Okay, well, let me finish the thought. There is serious doubt, certainly in our minds, as to what further can be achieved through military action. I've spent a lot of my time as a professional diplomat working in conflict zones and in counter-terrorism, and it's very clear that you cannot defeat insurgencies or terrorists solely and only through the use of military force. You need to combine it with intelligent use of diplomacy and politics. And that is what is lacking. The other thing you need for a just war is adherence to the laws of war. And that includes, for instance, humanitarian aid. And that became a significant problem quite early on with...
when would you say it became an issue?
Well, you will remember the debates, the intense debates, even in late 2023, over when we could get Kerem Shalom open, whether the ports could be used for the Israeli ports could be used for importing goods, the Rafah crossing. That became an issue relatively early on in the war. Similar questions about proportionality, the scale of destruction and death. Is it proportionate to the objective that is being achieved? And finally, a question which I know is acutely sensitive in Israel, and I understand why, but the role of the International Committee for the Red Cross, absolutely essential in every conflict. They play a unique treaty-defined role. They're not just another NGO. They have a treaty responsibility, and they have not been able to fulfill that either in Gaza or in Israel. And that is a real concern. And the problem is when these concerns have been raised, and as I say, they have been raised with increasing intensity, not just by the current British government, but by the previous British government. The replies that we sometimes received seem to not understand the seriousness of these concerns. And we've seen this very recently. So there is undeniably, quite clearly, acute and severe suffering and hunger in Gaza. The IPC have classified it as famine. And we see people trying to explain away a couple of pictures which may well be propaganda. But that doesn't explain away the problem. The evidence for severe suffering in Gaza is undeniable. And the response to that needs to be...
Evidence based on who? Because the IDF and the COGAT gave different numbers, including the IPC report, which was really
hundreds and hundreds of eyewitness accounts.
Standards. So you know, there were...
Hundreds and hundreds of eyewitness accounts from people inside Gaza. I've personally spoken to people who have worked, doctors who have worked in Gaza. We've seen people come out and give testimony as to what the conditions are in Gaza.
No, there is no argument between that the conditions are bad because it's a war, but using materials which is based on distorted numbers and different standards, as the IPC report, it was denied officially by Israeli authorities. It's not something that I'm saying.
So I think this is precisely the problem, Avital. Seeking to explain this away. And not engaging with the very large amount of evidence on the other side of the argument. I mean, put it this way. Let's put it this way. Leave aside this Palestinian suffering, Israel does not want to be anywhere near a debate over whether there is or is not famine taking place. That's
There's
terrible.
No famine taking place. We know that there is no famine.
Well, you don't even want the debate to be happening. There was a policy announced by this Israeli government in spring 2024 to flood Gaza with aid. That was the right policy, and that is the policy we would like to see now. And so that is why our repeated raising of these concerns has required us to steadily take measures to demonstrate that if the situation does not improve, we're going to have to mark our disagreement on that by taking action, direct action, and we have done so.
So, following it up on what you're saying, I mean, I know there are 300 trucks that are entering Gaza every day and numerous tons of aid. 80% of the trucks are food, as far as I know. I just heard a briefing from a COGA general last week. But where are the relations going from here between the countries? Because it seems that it's not going to a good direction. How do you see it progressing?
Well, I'm professionally obliged to be optimistic, and I can see a route to a very rapid improvement if the right decisions are taken. So, Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, has promised, alongside a number of other leaders, to recognise the state of Palestine next week. the purpose, this is not intended as a threat. This is intended as a positive gesture. And it's really important to point to let me finish the thought. It's important to take notice of one of the things that we have achieved through this promise is to get signatures of the Arab League, Turkey, Indonesia on a document at the end of the two-state solution conference in July in New York, in which they all committed to a vision of the future in which Israel, alongside a state of Palestine, is integrated into a wider Middle East with normal diplomatic, economic and trade relations. It is, if you like, as some people have put it, not a two-state solution, but a 23-state solution. And that is a vision which ought to appeal and indeed be embraced by all Israelis. It's a vision which we wholeheartedly support. And so when we talk about recognition, we're talking about embracing that vision, denying the one-state solution of Hamas, which is to destroy the state of Israel, and the one-state solution advocated by some people, some extremists in Israel, who want to see Palestinians expelled. Neither of those visions, neither of those extremes visions will work. They're not acceptable. We stand against them. And our recognition will be a demonstration of our commitment to a peaceful future in which the two peoples live side by side. And you may call me naive for promoting that vision, but there is no alternative. There is no alternative which works for Israel and no alternative which works for the Palestinians.
Thank you for that. I want to turn to you, Kornelios. 2 years later, did anything change in the Cypriot-Israel relations? Or perhaps it grew stronger?
I have an easier job than Simon. Thanks to the proximity and to the high level of trust between the two countries, but also the excellent relations, Cyprus has served, first of all, as a hub during the war for the evacuation of foreign citizens from Israel and the return of Israelis. And let me share one personal note here that I was really amazed when we started receiving calls from Israelis abroad, because at that time it was only Cyprus as a destination from Ben Gurion, maybe another 2 destinations. So they were trying to come back to Israel via Cyprus. It's amazing. People ran away from the war, not coming back. Secondly, Cyprus has tried, and we are still trying, with cooperation with Israel to serve as, to create a maritime corridor for the transfer of aid to Gaza. We did this with the UK, we did this with our partners in the EU and with the Americans and other Arab nations in the region. So that's also very important. But the main thing, the main difference that I see is that the war brought more clarity in the Israeli optic about Cyprus. Before the war, it was Israel the most important country, one of the most important countries for Cyprus. After the war, Cyprus is an important country for Israel for the reasons that I explained.
Sure, 100%. And I want to share with the audience that yesterday we celebrated your National Day. And I want you all to know that the ambassador arranged a special act of the Houthi missile. So we were 300 people in a place, in a venue in Tel Aviv, which suddenly everybody got the alarm on the phone. So part of the experience. Jeremy and Luca, I want to ask you both the same question. I want to talk about, again, Simon brought it up, the recognition of the Palestinian state. The Israeli response to the French-led initiative on this issue was quite harsh, as you saw it. Germany and Italy both agreed that such a recognition at this time is simply wrong. They also said that this is or some people in Israel say that this cosmetic recognition is a price for terror. This was the Israeli officials' claim. And I want to ask you if you agree with it, or from your perspective, do you see it as a premature step that could lead to a counterproductive case that may create the illusion of a solution without really resolving the issue? And finally, and this is again to both of you, how is this issue overshadowing Israel's relations primarily with EU countries?
Okay, in terms of the... quite a few questions there.
Very easy,
I'm glad
saving
to see
the
we
best
have
for the
all
last.
of 4 minutes to answer them. Look, first of all, personally, I think the issue of the recognition of a Palestinian state at this time, I think it's putting an emphasis on the wrong place. And it's not because I'm against the two-state solution personally, but I think the fact is that at this point, I'm not sure that that is going to help the Palestinian situation on the ground. And in many ways, once this sense of recognition comes and is emphasized in the UN, this will bring about a reaction in Israel to further move towards annexing territories.
But from a German perspective.
Right, now getting to the German perspective is that this is also not just about Gaza. This is also about the West Bank and their commitment to a very firm commitment to a two-state solution. And frankly, I think that they see that that is wavering away when you have announcements on an E1 settlement in near Ma'ale Adumim and other statements made that this is not just to have a settlement but to bury the possibility of a Palestinian state. This is not going to go down well in Germany. And this is, again, I emphasize, I believe the commitment to Germany to Israel's commitment is still incredibly strong. But we are straining the relationship of a very firm strategic ally.
So where is it going now with this straining?
I was in Berlin over the last week, and a number of conversations I had, you can see a tremendous amount of dilemmas between what is the actual policy of the government. And if it's not just making announcements about E1 or other issues, it's about is Israel just simply excluding the possibility of a settlement with the Palestinians? And again, I have to come back to one thing you said. I've been under the impression after the last 2 years and everything we've been through, one of the major objectives of Hamas in the October 7th war was to prevent any historic reconciliation between Israel and the Palestinians. And if we come out of 2 years of suffering and almost 2,000 people dead, over 900 soldiers, including that have been killed, with no Palestinian-Israeli horizon, then in many ways, Hamas, that's a victory for Hamas. And that's a victory I'm not willing to give them.
Thank you for that. Luca?
Let me pick up from what Jeremy so rightfully said. The other big objective of the October 7 attack on Israel was to postpone any possibility of a regional alliance of normalization between Israel and the Arab countries. And so we too believe that there should be a perspective of a two-state solution because we believe in the regional integration of Israel within the Abraham Accords, the normalization, and in a more distant future, the creation of a solid IMEC between the Indo-Pacific, Europe, and the Atlantic. Now, this also tells us that when we do these kind of things, we cannot burn bridges. So we do not believe in the recognition of the Palestinian state until there is a negotiation, until there is a Palestinian state to recognize. Today there is no Palestinian state and there's nothing to recognize. And these are my thoughts, but this is the position of my government, and this was very clearly said by my Prime Minister and my Foreign Minister. Another thing that we have to keep in mind is that if you need to talk to everybody. So, for example, the civilian population in Gaza is suffering this 2-year war. We opened, with the Israelis, a Food for Gaza program where we bought tons of medicines and anything we could bring to Gaza. We brought 1,000 Palestinians out of Gaza to Italian hospitals. So we try to keep the bridge with the Palestinian side. But we have to keep this also with the Israeli sides, because you can't do anything without the Israelis. So you have to keep the relationship, you have to keep the diplomacy, and you have to remind our Israeli friends that the Americans are not their only friends, that there is a Europe, the Europe stands by Israel, and Israel is part of Europe. And because Israel is part of Europe and is part of the West, unfortunately for Israel, it is doomed to higher standards. It is very easy when you're an autocratic state to have lower standards. We see this every day, I'm sure you all agree, on the Eastern Front. So Israel, unfortunately for Israel, bad luck. You want to be in the West, this is how it is. You have to have higher standards. And so this is part of the relationship with this country, to try to bring this country into a community and not leave it outside of it. Thank you.
Thank you for a very candid answer. I want to thank all of you for being open and sharing your thoughts, and of course each and every one of you carry a role of contributing to the relations between your countries and Israel as well. So I'm sure you have a lot of challenges that you are facing, and thank you all for your friendship. Thank you, the audience. Thank you.